Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Survival Summit stream. The last stream we did was about 2 weeks ago, and I was in Puerto Rico on a family vacation, which is why we haven't been here in a while. Now we're back. If you missed the last live stream, it was called Urban Collapse, where we talked about urban collapse, the first 30 days of an urban collapse. One good sign I see right now is that in the multi-stream chat, we're also seeing TikTok comments as well. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the stream. Appreciate you guys being here. We had a pretty monumental week last week. We saw something pretty incredible. We had over 1.2 million views on the short clips that we've been putting up on all the platforms. And those 1.2 million views on the short clips were just from Facebook alone. Some people didn't like the short clips. They thought, hey, why am I not seeing the whole video? And then those same people, when we did put out the whole video, didn't actually watch the whole video, a very small percentage. So we put out the short clips to get people to try to come into the live stream or to watch the entire stream. And right now my computer is absolutely freaking out. For some reason the fan has kicked on like crazy. Hopefully that's not too loud. This has never actually happened before. I don't know why the fan's coming on. I'm not doing anything different than I normally do. All right, smashing it does not help. Let me know if that's too loud. I'll try to figure out exactly what's happening here. It's always something on this stream. Either the audio is messed up or something happens with the computer and it gets a little bit crazy. All right, I'm going to jump right into it. So this tells me something when it comes to those views. People are really starting to realize that the world we know it is a lot more fragile than it looks. And that real survival is about more than just riding out a storm for a few days or a few weeks. And we've all seen that in recent events. Hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, all kinds of crazy things that have happened recently. Oh, good. So you're not hearing out on YouTube? That's great. I mean, my microphone's pretty good, but this fan is absolutely going bananas right now. But I'm glad you guys can't hear it. All right, so tonight we're going to go a step further. We're going to talk about surviving a full year after a collapse. Not just the 30 days, not just the first chaotic week, first chaotic month, but the long, brutal road of rebuilding, adapting, and thriving when there's no cavalry coming to save you. Most survival plans stop way too soon. But if you're serious about making it, about seeing the other side, you need to understand what that year would actually look like. You might say, I don't care if I make it or not. Just let it happen. We see those comments on social media very often. But if you have children or family or even just close friends, I'm not sure why you would even say something like that. Here at Survival Summit, the Survival Summit family, we believe in God, family, country. Hopefully you guys believe in the same. I think a lot of people sometimes think selfishly when they think of bad things happening. They're not necessarily thinking about helping other people. Sometimes it's not even crossing their mind that their own family is going to need their help. So this is something that we need to think about, not just ourselves, but as humans. We need to try to take care of the innocent, protect the weak. That's what it's all about. At least that's my opinion. So let's talk about some real numbers for a second. Not fear tactics. That's another thing we hear all the time is it's fear mongering. Not speculation, but hard government data. From studies like the EMP Commission study in 2008, or Dark Winter, which was another one of the war game scenarios, or Cyber Polygon, or many others. So in 2008, the Congressional EMP Commission released one of the most sobering findings in modern U.S. history, saying that in the event of a high-altitude EMP, up to 90% of the American population could die within 1 year of a nationwide grid-down event, or similar total infrastructure collapse, like from a massive solar flare. That figure isn't just about the blast, it's about the domino effect. No power, no clean water. No water, disease, and hydration. No refrigeration, food spoils quickly. Hospitals, supply chains, fuel pumps, communications, all dead. Without electricity, modern society collapses in layers, and it collapses very quickly. And unless you've prepared for total systematic failure, you may become part of that 90%. Think about that 90% for a second. That could potentially mean 9 out of every 10 people that you know wouldn't survive a year after a massive collapse like that. That's pretty hard to imagine. So we're not talking about stuff that's extreme. It's a reasonable response to very real threats. There was a massive solar flare in 2012 that nearly missed us, and they estimate that could have knocked out the entire grid in the U.S., and that's how close we've already come, and that's just recently. Well, 2012 to me isn't that long ago, but apparently it was quite a while ago. Some of you may not even remember it. You can Google it. You can look up that massive solar flare that came pretty close to hitting us, and it could have taken down the grid. So let's talk about societal collapse just within a few generations, because I see so many comments online where people are talking about, this will never happen, this is fear-mongering, this is nonsense, what are you talking about? People love to think collapse is ancient history, something that happened to the Roman Empire or forgotten kingdoms 1,000 years ago. Here's the reality. Just within a few generations, let's talk about our grandfather's lifetime, our parents' lifetime, and my own lifetime. We have witnessed full-blown societal collapses, not disasters, not setbacks, full-scale collapses, some bigger than others. So let's go back to our grandparents' generation, which could be 1900s to 1940s. The Russian Revolution and Civil War, 1917 to 1923. Complete collapse of the Russian Empire. Rise of the Soviet Union after mass starvation, purges, and executions. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. U.S. and global economic systems nearly destroyed. Unemployment at 25%, massive starvation, rise of authoritarian governments worldwide. Weimar Republic collapse of the 1930s. Hyperinflation in Germany so severe that people burned money to stay warm. Collapse of democratic rule, and the rise of Nazi Germany. Now let's think to our parents' generation, which could be 1940s to 1970s. World War II, 1939 to 1945. Collapse of multiple nations. Nazi Germany, a good collapse. Imperial Japan, fascist Italy, entire cities were vaporized or leveled. Estimated somewhere between 70 and 85 million deaths worldwide, which would be civilian and military. Partition of India in 1947, which was collapse of British colonial rule. Mass genocide and displacement, over 15 million people were forced to migrate, and somewhere between 1 and 2 million dead. The Chinese Civil War and Communist takeover 1945 to 1949. Collapse of the Republic of China. Mao's communists seized power, leading to decades of purges and famines. Somewhere estimated between 8 and 12 million deaths between combat, famine, and purges. The Cuban Revolution, not quite as big, 1953 to 1959. Collapse of the Batista regime, rise of communist Cuba under Fidel Castro. Estimates between 5 and 20,000 deaths. Now, what about our generation, or my generation, specifically 1970s to present? Fall of the Soviet Union, 1989 to 1991. One of the largest empires in history collapses economically, politically, and socially. Food shortages, massive inflation, ethnic wars, estimated 3 to 5 million excess deaths across the former Soviet states due to starvation, crime, loss of medical care, economic collapse, especially in Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. The Yugoslav Wars, 1991 to 2001. Collapse of Yugoslavia into brutal civil wars, ethnic cleansing, and the siege of Sarajevo. Estimated about 130,000 deaths between the ethnic cleansing, combat, and famine. Then we get to the Rwandan genocide of 1994. Societal collapse lead to the mass slaughter in one of the fastest genocides in human history. Estimated 800,000 to 1 million deaths in just about 100 days. Think about that. 100 days. That is completely insane. Somalia, 1990s. Still crazy stuff happening there now. Total government collapse. Warlords took over. Piracy, starvation, civil war with no functional state for decades. It's hard to measure, but estimates of famine, war, and piracy casualties were about 500,000 to 1 million deaths. Now, the Venezuela collapse started in 2010-ish. Economic collapse, inflation over 1,000,000%. Can you imagine having 1,000,000% inflation? Starvations, blackout, mass migrations. Economic collapse, death tolls harder to quantify, but indirect deaths from malnutrition, lack of medical care, estimated at about 100,000 deaths. This is by NGOs, non-government agencies. Another one that a lot of people that I know are still really upset about, and hopefully everyone is, Afghanistan, 2021. The collapse of the U.S.-backed Afghan government in days and the return of the Taliban rule. Civilian casualties from U.S. withdrawals and Taliban resurgence estimated tens of thousands, somewhere between 30 and 50,000 either killed or disappeared since 2021. So what's the bottom line? In just 3 lifetimes, our grandparents, our parents, and mine, nations have fallen, millions have died, and societies have been turned to ashes. So when somebody tells us on social media, why are you preparing? Forget about the floods in North Carolina or Hurricane Katrina or the wildfires in LA. Think about some of the things that have happened just in the last few generations, and that should make you think twice. And it should make you understand that preparedness is extremely important for everyone. Societies are fragile. Collapse is not ancient. It's a living memory, and collapse could happen at any time. I'm not saying it's going to. I'm saying it could happen faster than you think. Let's look at some of the biggest, real quick, society collapses in all of recorded history. Zoom out even further across history, and the record gets even heavier. The Bronze Age collapse, 1200 BC. Major multiple civilizations, including the Egyptians and others, fell almost simultaneously across the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Trade networks disintegrated. Cities were abandoned. Literacy was lost, and entire cultures vanished. The fall of the Roman Empire, which a lot of people often reference, 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire collapsed under internal corruption, economic decline, and constant invasions. Europe plunged into centuries of fragmentation, feudalism, and cultural regression, which literally led to the Dark Ages. The collapse of the Mayan civilization, 8th and 9th centuries AD. Powerful city-states across Central America were abandoned, likely caused by a combination of welfare, drought, deforestation, and societal overreach. The U.S. Civil War, 1861 to 1865. United States fractured violently, over 600,000 dead, massive economic destruction across the South. Entire regions collapsed into ruin, lawlessness, and famine during and after the war. It took decades of military occupation and reconstruction to partially stabilize the country, and some scars never fully healed. Then you get to the Black Death, 1347 to 1351. The bubonic plague killed nearly 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's entire population. Labor shortages collapsed the feudal systems. Entire towns and trade routes vanished almost overnight. The fall of Constantinople, 1453. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnants of the Roman Empire, falls to the Ottoman Turks. That marked a fundamental shift in world power, trade, and European history. The French Revolution, 1789, 1799. Collapse of the monarchy and the old aristocratic order. Mass executions, civil unrest, famine, and a bloody rise of dictatorship under Napoleon Bonaparte. The Rwandan Genocide, 1994. In modern times, societal collapse. This is where we talked about 800,000 people, plus or minus, in just 100 days. The government structures disintegrated almost instantly, and neighbors turned on neighbors. Why does this stuff matter? When we see comments like that, it makes me think, who is picking up a history book? Why are people not remembering the things that are not that far off in our past? Just a few generations. Collapse happens when human systems are stretched to the breaking points, economically, politically, spiritually, and environmentally. And collapse always comes faster than people expect because humans are masters at ignoring the early warning signs. We're not exempt. We are definitely not untouchable. And if you look at the trajectory of history, the smart move is to prepare, not to pretend. So yes, I get a little bit animated. I get a little bit excited when I see certain comments that are a little bit crazy, in my opinion, that are a little bit crazy, because I just don't understand how people can forget things so quickly. So I want to make something clear. The first 30 days that we talked about in the Urban Collapse live stream, which you can still watch on YouTube, X, Twitch, and it should be on Spotify as well. Those are hard. They're very difficult, as we discussed. You know, that was the first 30 days of an economic collapse. The first 12 months are going to be savage. They're going to break people who are unprepared. They're going to break the weak-hearted. And they're going to break even the physically tough if they can't adapt mentally. If you survive the collapse itself, the EMP or cyber attack, financial collapse, war, whatever could possibly trigger it, you're going to wake up to a world where food isn't coming. Law enforcement won't respond. Diseases we thought we defeated will all start to come back. Trust, even with your neighbors, and maybe even family, will be in short supply. The rule book's gone. The government won't fix it. It's up to us. It's up to you, and it's up to me, and it's up to the people you choose to trust. So we're going to walk through the phases you'll cover over the course of a full year after collapse. We're going to break it down into seasons. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen in the beginning of the year, but I broke it down in my notes as far as seasons. So somebody put out a comment the other day. It was actually two people. A couple people put out comments where they said, hey, you're just reading from a book. No, I'm actually reading from my notes that are on my laptop. Some of you who've seen previous streams, I usually have it on a piece of paper and I go through the notes and then I fling the paper. But it's easier on the laptop. I'm not reading from a book. I did my own research. I'm reading from my own notes that I wrote myself. So yes, could I use a projector or could I use, something where you wouldn't know that I'm reading from my note? I could, but I just don't care enough and it doesn't matter to me. So that's why I'm looking at my computer a lot, as well as reading comments as they go by to make sure I don't miss comments, because I really want to try to answer as many comments as I can. It's not always easy, but I try to do the best that I can. Okay, so phase 1, which is what I called it, months 2 through 4, since we already went through the first month in the urban collapse scenario. Stabilizing after the shock. So this could be springtime if you want to start on a new year timeline. So we're gonna talk about phase 1 after the urban collapse scenario, where the 30 days of widespread, large scale collapse from something like a high altitude EMP or a massive solar flare or the World War III. It could be a number of things that could cause something like that. We're going to get into what happens after the first month of a major collapse. If you've survived the initial shock, that already puts you ahead of millions of people, especially if you look at the studies from the 2008 EMP Commission that said up to 90% of the population could die in an event so big that takes down the entire grid in the United States. The hardest part is really just the beginning. The looters, the desperate first wave of violence may have died down from what they were in the beginning, but it's still not over. A lot of reckless, impulsive threats may have started to burn out as far as intensity, but don't get too comfortable. Now the real test begins. What you're facing isn't random chaos anymore. It's a long, grinding fight for survival over a long period of time. What you're facing, it's a fight against slow starvation, disease, and organized threats that are learning how to operate without the old systems like law enforcement, court system, jails. These things, in the event of a large-scale collapse, are not going to be a thing anymore. So what are you going to be facing? Well, emergency food supplies are going to be running low. Whatever you stockpiled is getting thin, unless you had money to have a full year supply for your entire family, which can be really expensive. You're now officially in a countdown, trying to figure out how much time you have with the supplies that you've already stockpiled. And that can be really, really daunting for pretty much anybody. Critical sanitation. Issues are going to be emerging with sanitation, human waste, trash buildup, contaminated water. Disease becomes a bigger killer than the violence on a pretty large scale. Water sources may also be running low. Do you have a local water source where you can draw your water to boil or filter? As part of your PACE plan, did you plan for long-term water storage? Rain catch systems, filtration, natural spring locations. If you're in a bigger city and part of your PACE plan wasn't to go to an alternate or contingency location as part of your PACE plan, it's going to be much more difficult for you to procure water in a big city like that, especially once you're not able to get water from any of the commercial sources that are in the cities. And I've heard a lot of people say, don't come to the country. We don't want you here, which is valid. And I say the same thing to myself. I wouldn't say it online, but a lot of people do. And let's not fool ourselves into thinking that the big cities don't have highly skilled people, ex-military, law enforcement, a lot of highly trained people, highly dangerous and skilled people in the big cities. And They won't be just, piss poor, untrained gang members that are coming for your stuff. These could be big numbers of trained people. You're still going to need 360-degree, 24/7 security and the know-how to build a secure perimeter. Organized gangs are already starting to form at this point. It's not just going to be random looters. We're talking about tactically coordinated groups, sometimes better armed than you might be. You really need to be careful. I get it. A lot of people will say, don't come to the country because you'll never get in. But let's step back a little bit and let's think about what that really means, because there could be massive numbers coming from large populated areas where people are going to form groups, and you really need to make sure, because they're going to be fighting for territory, resources, and control. You need to have your stuff together and your training up to par if you're going to withstand something like that. So your number one goal is going to be create sustainability, secure existence before the spiral gets out of your control. And that means taking on 4 major actions immediately. Action number 1, long-term shelter. Your first priority, your shelter has to be fully adequate and defensible. In the first chaotic month that we talked about in the last stream, many of you were probably operating out of a makeshift setup. Maybe you were able to stay in your home because your area remained pretty safe. Maybe you had a good community, a good group. Maybe you were fortunate enough to be part of a strong defense network and your group is on point. Maybe your neighbors are banding together to protect your street, your town. Maybe you followed your PACE plan and you got out of Dodge. PACE, again, is primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. Maybe you relocated to a fallback site, which was also stocked with gear and supplies. But let's be real. Maybe violence, fire, and gangs or some other disaster pushed you out of every planned location. Maybe your entire PACE plan failed. Maybe it wasn't even something that you did. It was just what happened, and something specific just really pushed you out of everything. Maybe you're living off the land, which is the emergency phase of your PACE plan, and hopefully you never have to do it. But if you're operating like that off a temporary shelter, you're just trying to survive. Wherever you are, whether it's your original home, a rural bug-out spot, or an improvised camp, your shelter must shift from short-term survival to long-term durability. That means a lot of upgrades. You got to reinforce the entrances, doors, windows, garages, basement accesses, even attic spaces. Reinforce weak points wherever with whatever, lumber, metal, dirt, whatever you can. Create a defensible space. Clear brush, vehicles, debris so that an attacker can't use those for cover when they're getting close to your property. Improve the visibility line so you can see the threats coming more early. Clear fire hazards that could be weaponized against you outside of your location. Establish a safe room or even a fallback point, somewhere inside your shelter where you can retreat, regroup, and make a final stand if your outer defenses become breached. Think reinforced interior rooms, hidden exits, backup supplies stored separately. You want to build a comprehensive security plan. This isn't just locking doors. You need multiple layers of security. Early warning systems, patrol schedules if you're in a group, clear response plans for different types of threats, whether it's scavengers, gangs, or organized raids. And if you're mobile, if you're at a rural bug-out location, a temporary encampment, whatever it is, even an abandoned building, you have to stop thinking like you're bugging out. Bugging out is really just a short-term tactic. What you're trying to establish is a siege-resistant homestead. Wherever that is, you still need to plan for some type of a siege, because when people get hungry and people get desperate, things are going to get a little crazy. All right. Not too many comments. I'll flip back to the comments in a minute. Don't worry. So your mind shift has to be one of the most critical things. You're no longer fleeing. You're digging in, and you're committing to defending what's yours. You're committing to protecting yourself, your family, close friends, or even just innocent people that you happen to come across. So we did make an entire survival film on this very topic called Ultimate Bugging and Home Defense with EJ Snyder from the show Naked and Afraid. That film goes deep into practical strategies for fortifying your home or your shelter during a collapse scenario, everything from physical barriers to community defense ideas. It's a great resource if you guys want to check it out, thesurvivalsummit.com. So expanded action number 2, sanitation and water. This is a hidden killer. the threat most people completely forget about after collapse. Without clean water and proper sanitation, your community can be wiped out faster by disease than by violence. And the brutal truth is, most historic collapses show us it's not always the bullets that kill first, it's the infections, the dehydration, and the outbreaks. This phase is about fighting the invisible war, the war against sickness and death from preventable causes. So here's what we need to think about. Sanitation systems. Set up your safe latrine systems, and this is super critical. Your latrine or whatever you're disposing your waste should be at least 200 feet away from any drinking water sources. You don't want that seeping into your water source. Dig deep enough, at least a couple feet, cover the waste daily with soil or ash. Create a privacy screen for hygiene and morale. Short term, you could do 6 to 10 inches on the top of soil because that's pretty organic and it's going to break down matter much faster. But long term, you probably want to dig deeper, especially if you're in a big group. It's going to be pretty difficult to keep it short. And there's a lot of guys that make some pretty good videos, how to make outhouses, how to make latrines. There's a lot of information that you really should do. Next is hand washing. This should be non-negotiable. Creating a simple hand wash station near your latrine, even just a bucket with a spout and soap, can literally save lives. Set a rule. Anyone handling food, water, wounds, or using a latrine has to wash up afterward. Think about the signs you see at the, stores and restaurants. Employees must wash hands. This is going to become hypercritical, especially if society is down or if the grid's down. You are going to have a lot of issues with simple things that normally might just take a Band-Aid that could actually cause an infection that kills you pretty quickly. You're going to want to develop a trash disposal or a composting system. Trash piles up, attracts rats, insects, and can cause diseases. Either burn the trash safely in a controlled burn. Try not to burn plastic and toxic if you can help it, or bury the organic waste. Composting food scraps properly in a controlled piles away from your camp can eventually enrich your soil if you're farming. So keep that in mind. Water systems. Triple your water purification capabilities. If you thought you had enough, you don't. You need redundancy, not just filters, gravity-fed like Berkey systems or portable survival filters like the Sawyer, the LifeStraw, the Grail. You want to be able to boil water to a rolling boil for at least 1 full minute, and it's usually 3 to 4 minutes, I think, at much higher altitudes. You could do chemical treatments, bleach, unscented bleach, very important. Can be used, a couple drops per liter of water, shake it, let it sit for about a half an hour. You can also use water purification tablets like Aquatabs. They sell those pretty much at any survival store you'll find online. Set up rainwater collection if you're able. Even a few tarps and barrels can massively extend your water independence. And make sure you're pre-filtering rainwater through a cloth to catch the debris and still purify it. Some people don't think you need to purify rainwater, but you definitely should. We're not going to get into all the reasons why. There's a ton of reasons to purify water no matter what. You don't want to take the risk, especially if you don't have access to a hospital and you don't have access to emergency medical care. You need to be really, really important. Super important to do that. Once your water's purified, treat it like liquid gold. Store it in clean, sealed containers. No dipping dirty hands or tools into the water. Use gray water for that, water that you're not going to drink, water that you're not going to use with your food. Designate containers specifically for that, safe water versus, gray water, as they call it. And try to color code it if you can so people know this is clean water, this is gray water. This is something we did dishes with. Maybe depending on if we're not using chemicals, we can use this to water plants. You should be able to recycle gray water in a lot of different ways. Personal hygiene standards. So this is going to save lives at a bare minimum. Wash your hands as much as possible. Regular face washing prevents eye infections. Foot hygiene to avoid trench foot if it's wet. Proper menstrual hygiene supplies for women. That is very important. And a clean set of clothes, if possible, for sleeping. Minor injuries can be treated, and they should be treated immediately. A tiny scratch or a blister, which you sometimes nowadays might ignore, can turn into a deadly infection. So you need to be really careful. Clean wounds with water or antiseptic immediately, and cover and monitor them daily. Irrigate those wounds as much as possible. So what's the big picture? Well, in normal times, a stomach bug just means you're going to have a crappy weekend. But in a grid down collapse, a stomach bug can dehydrate you literally to death. In normal times, a minor wound, like I said, might just need a Band-Aid. But in a collapse, a minor wound can turn into a lethal bloodstream infection in as fast as 72 hours. Prevention is going to be your greatest weapon. In fact, preventing disease is just as important, maybe more important than preventing physical attacks. In every war throughout history, more men have died from disease than combat. And in collapse, it's going to be the same story. All right, expanded. Action. Number 3, food production has to begin. You really can't wait anymore. In the first month, you could rely on your stockpiles, canned goods, freeze-dried MREs. Maybe you had a much bigger supply, but if you didn't, or if you had to take more people into your group and their supplies weren't quite adequate, or family, whatever it is, you could be in a world of hurt, and you have to start transitioning to producing your own food. I would say even if you have a full year supply of food, of freeze-dried for a family of 4, you still should be trying to make and produce your own food, because survival is going to depend on what you can grow, raise, and gather. So here's what that looks like. Gardening. Focus on calorie-dense crops. You're not planting for luxury. You're not planting for what looks cool. You're planting for survival calories. So good early year crops would be potatoes, high yield, calorie dense, relatively easy to grow even in containers. Carrots, nutrient dense, and they store pretty well. Beans, rich in protein, they can help fix nitrogen in soil. Squash, corn, sunflowers, those are all a great calorie yield per square foot. Containers and raised bed gardens are excellent for quick startup if the soil quality isn't great. Companion planting. Planting crops that support each other helps prevent pests naturally. Example, planting corns, beans, and squash together, which they call the Three Sisters method. So farming and livestock. Small livestock is going to be king for rapid sustainability. Chickens. You can get eggs. You can get meat. Easy to feed with scraps, bugs, garden waste, and let them free range and forage on their own if you're able. Rabbits. Rabbits are one of the most efficient meat sources per feed pound. They're an excellent source. And if you all heard the saying, well, I don't want to say it, but rabbits multiply pretty quickly. They reproduce very fast, and they're pretty easy to manage. Goats. You got room for fenced-in area. Goats can provide milk, meat, and brush control. So goats can definitely be good to have if you have good fencing, because they love to get out of whatever you put them in. Pigs can be a handful. They eat a lot. I'm just not sure if I'd want to have pigs in that type of a scenario. And breeding cycles. You want to start learning how to breed and manage your animals now. Don't wait. Try to learn these types of skills now. If you wait until you're desperate to try to learn some of these things, it's probably going to be too late. Definitely guard your animals. They are a critical food source. You have to protect them not just from predators, natural predators and animals. You have to protect them from thieves and people that are going to be looking to steal your supplies. So you need to be really, really careful in protecting. Foraging and hunting. Expand your local food gathering knowledge. Somebody posted a comment the other day, or it might have been a week ago, where they said, well, if everybody in the United States had to start foraging and hunting, then everything would be gone, in the snap of a finger. Now, yes, if 330 million people, if that's the number, were to forage and hunt, yes, we'd probably be out of a lot of mostly everything, especially animals, probably within a month. But think about that. How many people actually know how to forage and know how to hunt? It's not going to be 330 million people. And the amount of people that won't make it even far enough to even think about that, there is millions of acres of land. And if you can really learn good foraging and wild edibles, berries, nuts, greens, obviously be 1,000,000% sure of the identification. Those mistakes that you might make thinking you're eating something edible could kill you. They could be deadly. Check out it's not in my notes. I think it's Merriweather's Foraging in Texas. We were talking to him in the comments about a week ago, and I think We may try to make a film with him specifically about foraging and wild edibles. This guy has probably more experience than anyone that I've ever talked to before, and I think he is an excellent resource. So if you're in Texas, check out Merriweather's Foraging in Texas. Fishing and hunting and trapping. These are often going to be better energy investments than trying to hunt large game, especially if you don't have a lot of skill hunting large game or your area may not have much large game. You can set passive traps or fishing lines and let them work while you're doing other stuff. Remember, if you're going to be trapping, you can't just set 1 or 2 traps. You need to learn the migration and the movements of the animals when they're going to like a water source or a food source. And you need to set a lot of traps. You know, for every 10 to 12 traps, maybe you catch 1 animal. Maybe you don't catch any, depending on the day. You might not. So you really need to make sure that you have a lot of traps set and a lot of passing fishing and trapping methods, especially if you have to feed a family. So don't just rely on one method either. Rotate between gardening, small game, fishing, gathering, foraging. Diversity equals resilience. Just remember that. Every single calorie you produce or gather is going to stretch that survival timeline for you and your family. The difference between life and death 6 months from now might literally be the seeds you plant today. Think long-term, think sustainability, and please start training and learning skills today, not tomorrow, not after something happens. Start learning those skills now while you can. Action number 4, security systems. So we finally come to security. Security isn't just you standing on a roof with a rifle anymore. Those days are over. Now it's about organized, disciplined systems that protect your people 24/7. You need perimeter defenses, establish clear boundaries with fencing, barricades, natural barriers like thorny bushes, ditches, berms, tires, whatever you can use. Anything that could slow down or channel an attacker gives you critical reaction time that you might need. Early warning systems like string up noise traps, tin cans, and fishing line if that's all you got. Use tripwire alarms if you have them. Place motion-activated lights or inexpensive battery-powered alarms if you have them. Control access points. Make it clear where people can and can't approach. You know, even if you have to go get some old vehicles to block certain roads, try to funnel people into the areas where you want them to go. And don't make it easy for them to approach your property or your perimeter. You just got to be really careful about that because it can get you into some trouble if you're not controlling the access points to your property. And you need rotating patrols and watches 24/7. Can't stress that enough. You got to have 24/7 eyes on the property, not just at night. You got to set a rotating schedule so people in your group aren't getting exhausted, even if it's just your family members. You need to blend hidden observation points with active patrols. Use dogs if possible. Dogs are amazing. Just have dogs that actually bark and they can be a great early warning system. Even the little yappers, if they're yapping away, not if they're yapping away at literally everything, but if they're barking a lot when people are coming by, that's a great early warning system. Hopefully you have a better, more vicious dog that you can use for this. But something else is check-in times and passwords. Should be routine within your group to prevent infiltration, especially if you're in a little bit larger of a group and it's not your immediate family members. You're going to want to use passcodes, check-in times. You're going to want to set a lot of that stuff up. Communications could be radios, could be hand signals, could be as simple as visual codes need to be in place. You need to have this stuff ready. Everyone needs to know what their role is and especially if you're using hand signals, everyone needs to know what those hand signals actually mean. Even basic walkie-talkies, they can be game changers. Mirror flashes, colored flags, whistles. Low-tech systems work too. You don't always need to have high technology. The low-tech systems can work fine. Keep a central rally point for everyone to go to if comms go down so that you know where to meet if you're not able to communicate with each other. You need rules of engagement. Some people would probably make some comments and say, oh, what rules of engagement? We just shoot on sight, ask questions later. What happens if you do that and it's your son who was away at college who you thought maybe didn't make it and he's walking through the woods on your property and boom, shoot first, ask questions later still? I don't think that's really such a great idea. So talk to your group. What happens when someone unknown approaches? Are they armed? Are they not armed? If you're giving them orders, what happens if they resist? What happens if shots are fired? Who makes those decisions? Who backs them up? Figure all that out now. Don't let it become a scramble to figure out what you're going to do if something happens. Without clear rules, panic and chaos can destroy you from the inside, and you really need to be careful about that. Remember, the gangs that are forming out there, they will have tactics. They will scout you, they will test your defenses, and they will try to divide and conquer if they have to. It won't just be, looters and rioters that are just jumping in right out of the gate, trying to burn you out of your property. These are going to be, I'm not saying they're all going to be tacticians. Obviously, they're not. But they are going to get together and try to figure out the best way to get to you, to get your supplies, and to get what you have that they need. So you need to be not just defensive. You need to be proactive, disciplined, organized, and you have to be mentally ahead of the threat. The survival of your group is going to depend on that. All right, so sum up phase 1, months 2 through 4, which is obviously just kind of a standard timeline that we're going through for the first year. Collapse isn't a wild riot. It's not random. Now it's a slow, grinding collapse of systems: food, water, sanitation, personal protection. The foundations of survival itself are under attack. If you don't stabilize now, if you don't adapt, if you don't fortify and build sustainable systems, you may not survive to see phase 2. It's not about running. It's not about hiding. It's about planting your flag in the ground and saying, we're going to survive. We're going to thrive. We're not going to be another statistic. Because after the first wave burns itself out, it's the prepared and it's the disciplined and the determined people who are going to carry the future forward, hopefully. So phase 2, months 5 through 8, this could be summer survival, early rebuilding. If you made it through the initial shock of collapse, through the brutal early months of chaos, summer arrives. The survival landscape is changing again. Both the opportunity and the dangers are going to present themselves. Phase 2 is about adaptation. It's about early rebuilding, cautious growth, and navigating a new kind of threat. If phase 1 was about stabilizing your survival, phase 2 is about laying the foundation for your long-term future. What changes you'll see, what changes you'll face. Well, die-offs may slow in the early months. The desperate, the ill-prepared, and the reckless largely eliminate themselves through violence, disease, starvation, and exposure. Now, the survivors who remain are a little more tough, a little smarter, probably a lot more desperate. Expect other survivors you encounter to be more resourceful, better organized, and definitely more cautious. This is going to shift the balance. Reckless attackers are going to be more rare, but the organized raiders, the rival communities, and opportunists are going to be much more of a threat now. If they've made it this far, like you have, they must have some preparation skills. They must have some sort of cohesion with a group, and they're looking essentially to take what you have. Water scarcity is going to be massive, especially if it's in the summertime. Summer heat's going to drastically increase those water needs. If you're already struggling with water systems, summer could break you. Rivers and ponds are going to shrink up a little bit. Wells may be dry or drop to dangerously low levels. Dehydration becomes an even bigger silent killer, and water theft becomes a real threat from those other groups that also may not have water. They're going to be looking for it, and they're going to get it wherever they possibly can. Crops maturing. So if you started planting in phase 1, you're now approaching your first real harvest. And crops maturing means you got a critical boost in food supply. But it also means you have something else other people want to take from you. You have more supplies. You did an amazing job preparing, but now other people see that you have that extra food supply, and they're going to want a part of that. Guarding your fields and gardens becomes just as important as when you were harvesting in the first phase. Organized threats, again, they are going to increase. Groups that manage to survive are getting stronger. They're organizing, setting up outposts, systematic raids, forming crude alliances or factions with other groups. You may even see groups setting up toll points, territory markers, or extortion rackets along key travel routes between places where people know there's supplies, like water or a lot of foraging. There could be a lot of crazy stuff. Tactics are going to evolve. It's no longer going to be the old school smash and grab violence. It's deliberate, it's planned, and often armed threats. So you need to watch out for that. The bottom line, the survivors left, they're not just lucky. They're learning and they're getting more dangerous. And you need to evolve too. So first thing you want to look at, one of your main objectives is maximize water security. It's now going to be one of your most critical daily resources. Summer heat, evaporation, increased water consumption, and a competition for water sources are going to make water security non-negotiable. You need to expand your water collection systems, whether adding more range cat systems, improvised cisterns from old tanks, barrels, tarps, or even dugout ponds lined with plastic sheeting. Whatever you can do to expand your water. Water discipline. Institute strict rationing when you have to. Water only the critical crops, no plants that you don't plan on eating, and reuse gray water like dishwashing water for crops, or even water that you've used to wash yourself, assuming that it's safe and you're not using some crazy chemicals. And protect your water sources. Secure the wells, springs, collection points with whatever you can. Fences, locks, guards, people watching. Try to camouflage off-grid water sources to avoid detection. So if you know of a natural spring in your area, try not to make that natural spring off like a easy path to find where they may see it. Try to make it so it's much harder to identify some of those things, especially natural water sources. And you need to improve your purification capabilities. Build slow sand filters and with activated charcoal for more large volume processing of water. You can use solar disinfection, leaving bottles in direct sunlight. You can try to build a solar still or multiple. Stockpile treatment supplies before they vanish. So bleach, again, don't get any bleach with any type of additive, just plain bleach. Water purification tablets, activated carbon, whatever you can get a hold of. And mark some of your cache water locations clearly for yourself, but again, discreet enough so other people aren't going to notice them easily. The next, food expansion. You're not just feeding yourself now, you're building a sustainable food economy for your survival group or your family. So you want to start expanding garden size, rotate crops to avoid soil exhaustion, basic crop rotation, leafy crops, root crops, beans, and add diversity, grains, corn, oats, fruits, berries, melons, herbs, not just for medicinal uses, but also for flavor. Protect your gardens and livestock. Try to keep your fences up, even if you have to make them yourself, if you don't have the right supplies, if you don't already have a little farmstead. Set up tripwire alarms again. Make sure that you're patrolling, especially during harvest periods. Preserve. You have to preserve food. You have to either dry, smoke, salt, or can your foods as much as possible. And invest some time in solar dehydration for the fruits, vegetables, and meat. You need to be able to save, even if you're just smoking meat, you need to be able to save this food for longer periods of time, especially if obviously you're probably not going to have a refrigerator. Unless you have like a really amazing solar setup, it's going to be pretty difficult to do that. And again, if your chickens or rabbits are breeding, you got to manage that population growth smart. Bartering surplus offspring. If you have so many chickens that natural foraging or the feed and the scraps that you're giving them is just too much, turn it into a meat bird or barter. Try to barter for other things you might need, especially like new chicks, or if your rabbits are producing a ton of offspring, you can trade for other things you might need. Maybe you need water more than you need something else. Maybe you need ammo. People are always going to be looking for food, water, and all those things that you would need in a collapse type of scenario. And when it comes to hunting and foraging, create a map. I say this all the time in live streams. Create a map of seasonal wild edibles in your area and the growth cycles. Know when berries are blossoming and growing in certain areas. Know where, as an example, when we were in Puerto Rico at the rainforest doing a tour, they showed us one of the plants that is kind of like a potato, and they're plentiful in that area. Learn where these things are. Try to take a live foraging class if you can, and just, even if you have to do it on a topographical map, maybe you don't have a GPS, hopefully you have both if you have a really good pace plan, and mark all these locations where all these seasonal wild wild edibles are, mark the locations of all the water sources, make sure that you keep that information handy, because it's going to be a gold mine if you have all that information and you know, okay, this is the season, this is where I'm going to get these berries, or this is where I'm going to get this plant, this is where the fruit trees are going to be. Oh, I thought my screen just froze. Scared myself for a minute. I thought I lost the stream. That would have been terrible. Anyway, so again, simple passive traps and fishing lines instead of going on some massive expedition looking for, big game. Some of this passive stuff like fishing and trapping could really gain a lot of really good catches if you're doing it right, if you have the training. And again, even a stealth garden, which they call a guerrilla garden, further away from your main shelter, hidden plots that you can survive even if your home base gets compromised. Think of it like putting a garden that is way off the beaten path, that's not close to your property, that even if they do find your supplies or things and they overrun your property, you could still try to get some food, still try to have some cache locations with supplies stocked. Really, something else that's going to come up, which is another objective, is going to be primitive manufacturing and repairing stuff. You're going to have to repair, replace, and build using a lot of primitive methods. You're going to have to create a workshop for woodworking, leatherwork, hopefully blacksmithing if you know someone who's good at it and has some supplies, or even sewing. Things like this could make a huge difference. You need to have tool maintenance, sharpen your blades, repair gear, fix the handles on some of your tools like axes and shovels, fix your boots, fix your backpacks, anything that might be ripped or torn. You need to be able to have some of this stuff that's fixed. And you need to repurpose as much as possible. Scrap metal, old fencing, abandoned machinery, anything salvageable. Strip it, reforge, whatever you need to do. And skills. I always talk about skills. You need to make sure if there's anyone in your group that does like leather repair or bow making or rope braiding or simple carpentry or black powder reloading, if you can get the supplies, try to cross-train everyone in your group so that if someone doesn't know how to, say, make a garden, have someone in your group that does know how to make a garden, have them do that with you. You want to try to cross-train, especially in security, you want to cross-train everyone in your group so that everyone can get a better skill level. And if you can do that across everything from foraging to medicinal plants to, all that type of stuff, that could be massive, especially if someone in your group is good at welding and carpentry or has a lot of really good mechanical skills. That could come in extremely handy. Your ability to repair and even manufacture stuff could be a huge economic engine for you guys as you're rebuilding and bartering with other groups. So the next is really careful community contact. By now, you've started probably encountering other survivors, small groups, or even settlements that might be like your own. Some are going to be friendly. Some are going to be predators. Some might be both. You want to scout first, approach second. Never walk blindly into someone else's camp. Watch from a distance, learn from their numbers, their patterns, their attitudes, the way you see them interact with each other. And then if you're going to negotiate with another group or another settlement, negotiate from a position of strength. Always be prepared to walk away from a terrible deal. And if you're bartering, don't ever show your full strength or your full inventory. Don't give up information that you don't have to, because what you might be doing, even if it's a small settlement, they might be partnered up with a couple other small settlements or groups, and they may decide this group has a lot of stuff. Let's band together and go take all of their stuff. As I talk about this, and as I just said that, you also have to remember, and hopefully you're good God-fearing people, because spirituality is going to come in massively in a grid down scenario. In a scenario, any type of collapse scenario, you're really going to need to rely on God if you expect to survive. Not saying people that won't survive. I'm not saying that. But don't ignore innocent, women, children, and families. If you have the ability to help them, you should do that. Because what else are we here for? If we're just here to be selfish and take everyone else's resources and just try to survive, what if you're wrong? If you don't have faith in God and you're wrong, your eternity is going to be pretty terrible. So be a good person. Help people when you can. Be smart about it. Make sure you're planning properly. Make sure you're not being taken advantage of by someone who's evil and is going to try to take you out. But you still need to think about helping the innocent. Because again, what else are we here for? What's the point? When it comes to intelligence sharing, you got to be careful. Information is now going to be a currency. Protecting the knowledge of your location, the numbers in your group, your food supplies, especially your security plans, operational security is going to be extremely important. And cautiously build alliances if you can. Selectively create mutual aid agreements for trading, defense, even labor. But always have an exit plan. Use layered security. Always meet, if you're going to meet another group or even another stranger, meet them outside of your main location at a secondary location first. Try to gather as much information as you can before you let people into your new domain. You need to be secure. A friendly handshake today doesn't mean they're not going to try to raid you tomorrow. So hope for the good, but always plan to be betrayed, because humans are one of the most dangerous animal on the planet. Because history has shown that we can become very, very primal and very crazy, especially when we're starving and thirsty and just trying to survive. So phase 2, it's not about just surviving the day anymore. It's about building the foundation for the next year and beyond that if you can. You have to master your water control, expand your food production, manufacture and repair whatever you can, and navigate the dangerous early politics of collapse. And I don't mean politics like governors and things like that. I mean just the politics of people and groups and organizations that are going to be possibly bartering, working together, and things like that. You really, really need to be careful. Very careful. So those who adapt now, those who grow stronger, instead of just hanging on, those are going to be the ones who have a real future when phase 3 comes. Now, phase 3, if it falls in the winter, months 9 through 12, hopefully it doesn't, but after a year, you're going to hit winter no matter what, unless you're somewhere where there is no super cold, like, Puerto Rico is 85 degrees average pretty much all year round. South America, Florida doesn't really get very cold. I was going to say Texas, but kind of know how that turned out a few years back. Texas can get freezing and it can surprise a lot of people. So you need to prepare for that. So we're going to be talking about the final phase of year 1, which I designated as winter. It's not just the cold that's going to test you. It's the hunger, the sickness, the mental wear and tear, and even the isolation. Even if it's just your family of 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever your family size is, you're still going to be isolated from a lot of other people. Some people are okay with that. Some people are not too good with that. So phase 1 was shock and stabilization, and phase 2 was growth and rebuilding. Phase 3 is going to be pure endurance, physical, emotional, and spiritual. This is where many survivors die, not because of bullets, but because of the cold creeping into their shelter and their mind. You really, really need to make sure that your group may be stable. They might even be hopeful. But now you're going to be facing things that maybe no training can even fully prepare you for. So some of the threats you're going to face, obviously freezing without modern heating. You no longer have access to the modern power grid, HVAC systems, or electric heaters. Again, unless you have a really amazing solar system set up. Fuel in all forms is going to become your lifeline. Wood, propane, kerosene, charcoal. Hypothermia and frostbite, they're going to become the silent killers, especially when you're sleeping. Starvation risks increase. Your food systems, they're probably closed for the season if you're talking about gardening and foraging, although you can still do some foraging in the winter depending on where you live. Your gardens are going to be dormant. Game animals are going to be more scarce in the winter. If you didn't preserve enough food in the summer, spring, summer, and fall, you're on a ticking clock again. People may start stealing, betraying each other over a handful of calories. This could be people who are within your own group. Hopefully not within your own immediate family. But you never know. You just never know. Sickness, it's going to spread fast. Closed quarters, limited sanitation, especially if you're in an area where you can no longer dig a latrine because the ground is 3 feet of frost. You're going to have limited sanitation, poor nutrition, so that could mean flu, pneumonia, infection, can tear through your group like crazy. Minor injuries, again, become deadly in the winter due to suppressed immunity. No antibiotics, no ER, no heating pad. You just got what you got or you don't. You're going to have a lot of issues with depression, breakdown, and again, betrayal. Cabin fever, seasonal depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Psychological warfare is going to start in your own head. And worse, inside of the hearts of some people in your group that you trust. You have to plan for it. You have to prepare your group for it, or you may end up splintering from within. So heating and fuel management. Heating, it's no longer a comfort in this phase. It's survival. If your shelter isn't properly insulated or you don't have enough fuel stored, you're going to start losing people at night. Seal your shelters like a survival capsule. Hang blankets, tarps, whatever you can over doors and windows. Use plastic sheeting to block drafts. Divide rooms up. Sleep in smaller areas. Try to conserve body heat. Create micro-warm zones, tent and enclosed areas inside of even a room. Ventilation is going to be critical. Carbon monoxide can take you out very, very quickly. So you need to be really careful about ventilating wood stoves, propane heaters, or burning anything with flues. You just have to be really, really careful when it comes to ventilation. Fuel strategies. Stockpile now if you're not already in the winter, especially wood, charcoal, even alcohol or wax-based heaters. And burn low smoke fuel whenever possible. Use rocket stoves, Dakota fire holes, small tent stoves, anything that's efficient and heat concentrated like a rocket stove. It's going to use much less fuel source and it's going to give you a nice concentrated heat, and you're not going to go through a ton of lumber just trying to stay warm or trying to cook food. Insulate the beds and clothing. Layer wool, mylar blankets, sleeping bags. Keep dry socks at all times. Cold feet can equal a weakened immune system. Body heat sharing can save lives, especially for children and the elderly. Sleep in shifts. Keep one person awake to monitor the fire and check for hypothermia signs. You should be sleeping in shifts anyway. Your security team should be sleeping in shifts at the very least. And rationing. Rationing may be to the extreme in the winter. This is going to be your tightest food area of time is going to be in the winter. If you miscalculated the summer harvest, this is the phase where it's going to hit you the hardest. If you're lucky, you stored grains, beans, dried fruit, salted meats, or even canned goods. If you're not lucky, you're about to learn how long someone can last on bone broth and pine tea, which really sounds terrible. So you need to be really, really careful. You need to divide supplies by calorie count, not just by volume. Prioritize carbs, grains, root vegetables, fats, oils, nuts, lard, and some protein. Calculate calorie minimums for each group member based on the workload. So you should be rotating who eats what and when. Not everyone's going to need to eat equal meals. Rotate heavier rations for those that are doing hard labor, those that are doing a lot of patrol, spending a lot of calories, or possibly nursing. Make use of the winter hunting, fishing, ice fishing, small game traps, beaver sets, whatever you have the skills for. And even scavenging frozen animals, roadkill, abandoned kills. Somebody may have gotten an animal and it took off and they never found it. And if it's frozen, it's not gonna be spoiled. It's not gonna have flies all over it. If you catch it early enough, you'll have a good meat source if you can get a scavenged frozen animal. Extend foods with fillers. Mix grains with pine needles, cattail root, acorn flour, leached, of course. Use bones, marrow, skins in stews to get every last calorie that you can possibly get. You really need to try to stretch it out in the winter as much as you possibly can, because winter is going to be just a very dangerous time when it comes to survival. And you need to preserve some mental morale with food. Save tiny portions of comfort food, spices, cocoa, salt, dried fruit, for moments where people might be having a little bit of a breakdown. Even one hot drink can save somebody mentally from falling apart. You would be surprised. And remember, people will lie, steal, and even kill for food if they're starving. Even people that you once trusted. So you have to, some of the stories you hear from like the crazy stuff in history where people have starved, it's mind-blowing. It really is mind-blowing. Takes me back to the beginning of the stream when we were talking about all the catastrophic, crazy events that have happened, and people just casually dismiss all of them, thinking that can't happen to us. Nothing like that could ever happen to us, but that is a very, very dangerous attitude to have. Winter's brutal, not just physically, emotionally, and psychologically. People break, people give up, people stop caring. Some people die quietly in their sleep, not even from illness, but from emptiness. You have to be able to lead through the psychological winter, or no one's going to make it. Keep a routine. Have wake-up times, have meal times, have chores, schedules. It gives people purpose. People need to have purpose. Structure and purpose in a world that might feel really, really empty and hopeless. And hopefully, again, spirituality. God will get you through. We don't always get promised a long life. We don't always get promised an easy life. It's usually a hard life. But there's a reward at the end of this life. So live the best life you can. Do what you can. And just keep praying. That's all I can say. Just keep praying. And keep training. Keep teaching skills. Even the Bible, there's plenty of verses in the Bible that talk about being prepared, being a wise steward, and helping others. So you also, when we talk about structure and giving people purpose, even the weakest members of your group, they can clean, they can mend, they can do inventory, they can entertain, make people feel needed. It's purpose that's going to keep their soul alive. And limit isolation. Check on everyone daily. Watch for them becoming really quiet, really withdrawn, really irritable. Those can be signs of depression or even full mental collapse. Create moments of joy, storytelling, singing, small celebration of things from the past, jokes, reading out loud. These aren't luxury. These are essential. You really need to keep morale up, especially when you get into the long phases after a collapse. And again, watch for betrayal. When the food and the heat runs out, desperation can twist people. It can be, you have to be discerning. You have to, don't ignore small red flags. Set up layered trust, layered security, and really keep an eye on everything that your group is doing and what they might be going through. And again, if you believe in God, which hopefully you do, this is the time to reconnect. Faith is going to become an anchor when reason fails. If you're leading, you got to be the hope for other people. You have to be. Try to stay strong for your kids and your family. Have someone you can confide in too. You can't just be the leader all the time. You're not immune to that kind of stuff. You can get leadership fatigue, guilt, pressure can even break the strongest survivor. So you really need to have someone that you can confide in. So, end of year 1. Phase 3 was about endurance through darkness, cold, hunger, and doubt. You're not just fighting winter, you're fighting the breakdown of the human spirit. But if you make it through this, if you stay warm, you stay fed, you stay united, you're not just a survivor. You're beginning the new chapter, possibly a new chapter in history. You're the seed for what's coming next, a new civilization forged by fire, hunger, and hope. Endure now, and you'll earn the right to rebuild. So, essential skills that I think you really have to have. Obviously, food production. Stockpiles are temporary. Unless you have like a massive stockpile for 20 years for your family, it's going to be temporary. Food production is going to be life. You have to know how to produce calories year-round with no grocery store safety net. So you want to get really good at gardening, high-calorie crops, potatoes, beans, squash, corn, sunflowers. Understand soil management, composting, crop rotations, the basics of soil pH levels. You need to know how to plant, tend, harvest in your region and in your region's seasons, depending on where you live. And then again, raising chickens, rabbits, goats. But you also need to have some basic veterinary care, deworming, wound care, recognizing disease in your animals. Seed saving. Heirloom seeds can be regrown. Hybrids often can't be. Learn proper collection, drying, and storage methods. Foraging, again, going to be massive. Identify edible plants, berries, nuts in your area. Learn what's poisonous. Again, mistakes will kill you very quickly. Hunting and trapping. You got to set up effective snares, deadfalls, fishing lines. You got to learn how to field dress animals, preserving meat through drying, smoking, salting, canning, whatever methods you can learn. Try to learn them now. And if you can't create calories from your environment, man, you're going to be on borrowed time. Again, unless you have a massive stockpile. And again, water management. You can survive weeks without food. In most cases, there's obviously variables to that. You're only going to survive a few days without water. And in a collapse, water becomes one of the most contested and fragile resources imaginable. You can't drink cash. You can't drink gold or silver. You can only drink water. So you need water purification skills. Know how to filter, how to boil, how to chemically treat, build a slow filter with sand, have some skills on how to build a solar still. You have to learn a lot of different methods, which again comes back to PACE planning, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. That comes into effect for every one of the 9 pillars of preparedness, every single one. Shelter, fire, water, food, signaling, land nav, medical, communications, and personal protection. You need to keep those 9 pillars of preparedness in mind at all times. Rainwater catchment systems, building improvised wells or spring capture systems, diverting and storing creek water or runoff safely. Rationing systems, again, reusing gray water for non-drinking purposes like gardening, cleaning, things like that. One of the key principles, find it, store it, purify it, protect it at all costs. Water is life. Without mastery, the lack of water can take you down very, very quickly. Please keep that in mind. All right. I'm just going to look back at some of the comments. Bad Bob says, thank you for being a beacon in our time. Need great information, need great preparation ideas. Another one says, do you think the power will go out tonight? Simpson predicted it. I don't actually know anything about that. I don't know if I've seen that. I think my multi-stream chat is being funky again because I'm not seeing all the comments anymore in the multi-stream. It's very strange. All right, anyway. Let's see. I'll get back to the comments. Sorry about that. All right, again, medical skills. That's another layer you're going to need. In a collapse, the minor injuries can kill you. Common infections can wipe out your entire group. Medical skills, they really are non-negotiable. First aid proficiency, wound cleaning, closure, whether that's butterfly, sutures, staples if you're trained, treating burns, sprains, fractures, and recognizing signs of infection. Preventive medicine, hygiene enforcement, hand washing, safe latrines, trash management, and nutrient management. Preventing scurvy, rickets, dehydration. Improvised medical techniques, building splints, slings, field expedient, stretchers, making herbal remedies from local plants. Triage and emergency decision making, knowing when, how, if you ever had to amputate, if absolutely necessary. Knowing when to stop wasting supplies in a lost cause. I hate to say it like that, but if someone's not going to make it, and for sure, you probably shouldn't be wasting supplies. And I really hate saying that because it's just a terrible thing to think about. It really, really is. And again, primitive construction. Your ability to build, repair, and shelter yourself from the environment is going to be critical. Whether it's basic carpentry, tool repair and maintenance, fencing and defensive structures, weatherproofing, insulating. If you can build, repair, and adapt to your environment, if you can't do any of those things, nature is going to take you out pretty quickly, maybe even faster than enemies would. And one really, really big one is situational awareness. You have to be a master of reading people, places, and threats before things happen. Read the environment, tracking signs of nearby people, whether it's footprints, trash, disturbed vegetation, monitoring wildlife patterns. Birds and animals, they react to human activity. You need to have threat assessment, instantly categorizing new people as threats, neutrals, or potential allies. Watch hands and eyes first. They betray intentions way before words do. Personal security habits. Never walk through blind into new areas. Staying in condition yellow. Alert, but relaxed at all times. Escape planning. Always have multiple exit routes. Know the terrain. Practice blindfolded navigation, night movement, whatever you can. Try to get as much training as you possibly can. And a big one is going to be group leadership. Survival, it's not just a solo act in phase 2 and 3. You need to live, work, and fight as a team, or you will fail. Leadership skills are critical. You need to have group organization. You need to assign roles, guards, hunters, medics, cooks, craftsmen. Rotate the duties to prevent either resentment or burnout, or both. Conflict management. You need to learn how to de-escalate disputes before they turn deadly. You need to be able to mediate as much as possible. And again, morale building. Encouraging small wins, celebrating harvests, successful patrols. any of those types of things where you can try to build morale. But discipline enforcement, set clear rules in your group, make sure you're enforcing consequences for theft, betrayal, endangerment, anything that could cause harm to your group as a whole. And strategic planning, thinking weeks and months ahead, not just surviving today. You need to train your group for upcoming threats and even seasonal changes throughout the course of time. Good leadership holds group together when survival gets really ugly. Bad leadership tears it apart faster than any outside enemy ever could. And here's the truth. Gear wears out, supplies run dry, luck runs out, but skills, true hard-earned skills, can keep you alive. If you invest in building in all these areas, not just stockpiling, but truly mastering them, you're not just going to survive a year after collapse. You may survive for much, much longer. And you might survive it with strength, purpose, and the ability to rebuild. You may help a lot of people along the way. Surviving a year, it's transformation. It's not just the strongest who survive. It's also the smartest, the ones who adapt, and the ones who build tribes and community. You got to stay humble, stay strong, and stay ready. All right. That was pretty much all my notes for tonight's live stream. I actually got through that much faster than I thought I would. I'm going to go back through the comments now because something definitely happened to the multi-stream chat. It got a little crazy, so I'm going to have to go back up through. Heather Lee says, I already got my seedlings growing in my Jiffy pots. That's awesome. Mel says, hello. Hope you had a great vacation. We did. We were in Puerto Rico for a little less than a week, and we did a tour of the rainforest. We did a bunch of stuff, tour of Old San Juan, things like that. It was pretty good. Memory Man says, good evening. Revival 35. I wonder if other settlements will have scouts. Oh, yeah, I remember that section. If they're smart, they definitely will have scouts for sure. Kazoo says, joined in late. Would think you would get any pending medical care taken care of before disaster hits. Dental comes to mind. Yeah, for sure. Man, if you have a medical professional, especially if you have a doctor and a dentist or a PA or a nurse in your group, hopefully you have a really good PACE plan where you have some people in your group that have some of those skills, especially medical, because that would be really, really amazing to have. Marjorie Mahuda says, know who to trust. Definitely know who to trust. You can't just rely on yourself. She talked about learning basic first aid. Again, I'm sorry I missed some of these comments when they first came out. It's I don't know what's happening to the multi-stream chat tonight. That and the stupid fan on this computer have been really, really loud. So I'm going to go back through TikTok comments because those I was seeing at first, but I'm not seeing them anymore. Let's see. Yeah, 1873 Homestead says, too many people believe it's going to be like it is in the movies. Yeah, no, very far from it. And it's not, we're not guessing. We're literally taking data from historical events and events that have happened in the last, couple generations, hell, events that have happened in the last few months. There's just a lot of information and a lot that you can learn from history. It's really mind-blowing when people don't pay attention to that type of thing. And they just seem to think that nothing bad will ever happen. It really, I hate to say it, but it really blows my mind. I don't get it. I mean, I know people walk around with rose-colored glasses. They're not paying attention a lot of the time, and they don't think these types of bad things can ever happen to them. But, man, it happens so much more often than people think. So much more often. All right. If no one has any questions, I think I'm going to split for the night. I am going to edit up this video and start putting some smaller clips together, and I'm going to try to get this up on Spotify tonight if I can. I'm hoping to do that. I will see you guys this Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I don't have a topic yet, but I'm going to come up with one either tomorrow or at the last minute on Thursday. But it's probably going to be something. I might actually talk about more of suburban survival versus like the urban collapse or versus kind of long-term survival in a big collapse. I may talk more about some of the, because man, the people who live in the suburbs, it's a massive, massive percentage of Americans, obviously, especially in the United States. It's a really big number. And there's going to be some differences and things that you're going to want to think about, things you're going to want to do if you're in the suburbs, especially if you don't have a good PACE plan with a good primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency plan. Or maybe you just don't have the funds to put something like that into play. All right, until the next time, I will see you guys on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a good night.